Thanks for the invitation, and I will give a presentation about work we have conducted which originated in the Swiss Physicians Society for Psycholytic Therapy. And we are a kind of team there. We try to conduct therapeutic studies with psychedelics since a kind of 30 years. And during the last few years, we were able to do a study with LSD and with MDMA, and I will present the results which have been published already in two major scientific journals. One was mainly about the quantitative results, and we have conducted an additional studies interviewing these patients which we have treated, and I will give you the results of that qualitative study. So don't be angry at me if I present you some quotes from the patients. I mean, you have to read them yourself, and I will not present everything. So let's see. Okay. So there's a short overview. I'll give you some ideas how that approach was developed to treat patients that way, which are in a life-threatening disease condition. And we have used LSD in life-threatening disease. And we have done this qualitative study as a second part of the study, and I give you some ideas about the mechanism of actions, and also a synopsis at the end. So, as you may have heard already, life-threatening disease condition, which is usually defined in the older study as an end-stage cancer patients, but we want to go out of that and broaden the scope to more patients which have a life-threatening disease condition, which means you potentially may die from it, but you may not at last because of some medical treatment or whatever. But the existential anxiety and the isolation and the fear of death and all these symptoms which appear in end-stage cancer patients, typically you will have with that condition too. And these are the main features of that, especially the isolation. So instead of opening up and clearing up the things you have to clear up in your life still, you usually close down with these anxieties and fears. And so there are certain quality of life issues for these patients and their relatives. Shouldn't forget that. So usually the patient is and he was one of the major guys in the field, so he knows what he's talking about. And it was this approach was discovered, in fact, by an anesthesiologist using LSD or trying to use LSD as an active placebo in a morphine study. And this was in the mid-50s, right? Where they didn't know so much. They thought they could irritate the people by this active placebo so that they can't figure out if they got morphine or not. But what they found is that these people got better than the subjects with the morphine. And they speculated about defocused pain perception, so they needed much less pain medication afterwards. And they were wondering about that. And they had no really elaborate idea at that point of time, but what they have seen clinically is that they had much less anxiety in general, and especially about death. And so what they discussed at that point of time in the mid-50s was there was a kind of frame change where they put it that disease of themselves in, and there were some spiritual effects that were not defined further. And the early pioneers, as you may remember, Aldous Huxley injected himself with 100 micrograms of LSD when he was in fact dying. So he was kind of an early pioneer. And another great guy in LSD research was Sidney Cohen, and he was the second one who used that approach in a more or less systematic fashion, treating some patients. But he wrote an article in a popular magazine explicating that this may be a treatment in the future and may change our relation to death. And then the Maryland group, the prominent Walter Pahnke, who died too early, Stanislav Grof, as well as Bill Richards, which is still active today with the Maryland group, with Roland Griffiths. And Charlie Grob at the UCLA has done some research in that field. And Peter Gasser, this is a guy who conducted the sessions in this study also. And already mentioned at NYU, Jeff Guss and his team, they are doing these kind of treatments too. So we studied LSD, so that is a kind of core substance where a lot of people get anxious or get even panicked if they don't have taken it, by these 3 letters. So what happened is that 12 patients were included which had a life-threatening disease by a certain definition. They had kind of around 10 psychotherapy sessions before they got the LSD and some afterwards, right? And there are 2 LSD sessions, one with 200 micrograms. I will give you some ideas about why we chose this dosage later on. And this was controlled by another dose, which was 25 mics, so it was equivalent to that very low dose psilocybin in the Johns Hopkins studies. And what we used, in fact, is not the psychedelic approach. It was a conscious decision, and it wasn't, which is giving high doses only a very few times. And we didn't use the psycholytic approach, which is a different deal, giving serial sessions with low doses. So we came to the conclusion that somewhere in the middle, maybe something better or working more on the patient. And so we will see that. And we had 2 therapists, a female and a male. That's really important. Think about that. And it was a continuous change between stillness and music during the session. So the music wasn't as dominant as it is usually in psychedelic therapy. And we have done post-session evaluations with certain measures. I can give you only a few ideas about that. And we have done follow-up evaluations after 1 year of finishing the treatment. So what was the psychological procedure? As usual, informational consent. Then during this pre-session psychotherapeutic session, a kind of working bound was established, and these personal issues and conflicts were discussed during these sessions, especially in relation to relatives. We really should look for that. And especially in respect to problems and acceptance of disease or dying in some cases. And this is Peter Gasser in a real session during this therapeutic study. And what we found is, I give you only a short idea because I don't want to refer to the first paper as much. So this was from the first paper, and it gives you the STAI. So this is a state trait anxiety inventory, a gold standard to measure anxiety. And what we found is that this is a placebo group. So you see that during, it was a special design because every patient got the treatment, but some got it first and some got it later on. So we could compare how the placebo subject behaved in respect to these measures. And you see that they got more anxiety. It's not because of the low dose LSD, it's because of the terminal illness itself and to be threatened by it, right? And then you see here the verum subjects, the subject with the high dose LSD, and you see that they go down. And later on, this group on the placebo first was treated also, and you see that they were going down equivalently. Don't get fooled because they started lower, right? And here is a really interesting thing coming, I think, because the state anxiety, this measure, the state trait anxiety instrument, measures the state of anxiety, what you have right now, maybe when you fill out the questionnaire, and it also measures a kind of anxiety which may be inherent in your personality, your character, your usual condition of your organism, right? So we have 2 different measures. One is giving the state anxiety, how you feel right now, and the other is giving this trait characteristic anxiety. And what we found is, interestingly enough, that this state anxiety was going down much, and even after the follow-up, it didn't go up again. So it is a stable condition what we produced here, And interestingly enough, this was not significant in a statistical sense, but you can see what happened to the trait anxiety. And if you use usual psychotherapeutic or pharmacological anxiety treatments for anxiety, then you will see that just the state anxiety is going down, not the trait anxiety. And this can refer us to a kind of neurobiological mechanism which is at work there. So the qualitative study was designed that way here. So what happened during the therapeutic work? Because if you have these measures, they are nice to know, but you don't know what happened during the process inside the session. I mean, and the people got, it seems, most of them got a confrontation with the fear. It means the fear is going up during the trip, right? And then they reached a cathartic peak, and then there was, in most of them, a sudden change of emotion. So it was fear and anxiety and insecurity before, and then that changed to something else, from fear to trust, it seems. And that could be a really important thing if you're in such a condition, right? And the trust, what seems to be from the qualitative study, the core of the matter, it was sustainable. And I give you an idea about these psychedelic effects. So, and here from the outside, if you want, but this is from a book by Schiller in 1976. So you go through maybe a euphoric state, then you go into a kind of anxious state, and then you may come back in a kind of more or less ecstatic state. So. And what's about the mechanism of action? This gives you an idea also about what happened during the session. The psychological mechanisms you can divide into a few features, which is facilitated access to emotions, catharsis, as mentioned before, change of basic emotions, altered perspectives, and changes, lasting changes in perspectives, attitudes, and values. And I will give you some quotes about every feature. Well, these were very impressive. I tried to put out some exemplary ones, but you can find them in every interview. And so these cathartic cleaning, purgation-like things were going on quite a lot with the people. And then they came through a kind of hole into something else. So it seems that some people have had this change in basic emotion in one session. They got the fear, then the change. Others had the first trip being in panic and fear and so on, and the second trip was different. This one was a person was having a completely different second trip. Here you see that person is describing that. This may be the kind of key element of the basic change. And also important was that the people had the ability to look from a different kind of angle or perspective into their situation. So usually anxiety is so much dominating that you can't come up with these clear thoughts. And I try to make a diagram, as scientists do, to give you an idea about the process. So you start with fear and distrust at first, it seems, and then the LSD process is going on. Try to draw that here. And you may confront some hindrances even, and you can see, oh no, it's not visible. But the anxiety here is an arrow kind of thing. The anxiety is going up during the process, right? The further you go, the more anxiety you get. Here, that anxiety bar here. And then it seems that people go through that thing, and then something opens up. And so trust and a kind of more holistic perception of their own situation and the whole thing, like with the death issue and so on, is starting. And so the question comes up, are these peak experiences or are these mystical experiences which are mainly transporting the therapeutic effect of these sessions? And what we found is, with the state of consciousness questionnaire from Roland's group, is that these were mainly incomplete mystical experiences. Just one person had one session with a complete mystical experience. But all the others had kind of incomplete, and they were far from being complete, you know. But they had some features fulfilled in respect to the mystical experience questionnaire, and some not. And so they are more comparable to what Abraham Maslow has described as peak experiences, which are a little less mystical, a little less sacred feelings about them. And what was also important, as can be seen easily in the interviews, is that cognitive and psychodynamic experiences also played quite a role in the betterment of these patients. Because what we found is that with the 200 microgram dose, the people were able, it seems, not to be forced too much into the mystical or psychedelic realm. They were able to surf through all levels of the experience. And that may have helped them in a better way. Right? So that was one idea which came out of that. And what we can see in the results of the qualitative studies, I don't give the numbers here because they're not as much important in that case, but what we found is that the people had these statements in the interviews mainly. And these are the things which are outcomes which last for a longer time, right? Not only and the positive effects, not all are written here. And these are exactly the things what you really need to cope with such a situation afterwards, right? And you can propose some neurobiological mechanisms which are going on during these kind of therapeutic work, which is, as it was referred here to, sometimes the default mode network changes and leading to a kind of unconstrained cognition where you can look from other point of views at your situation or experience your situation in some different ways. And there were older studies suggesting that the thalamus maybe open up to a certain degree much more than usual, which refers to an old idea by Aldous Huxley, who said the usual survival-oriented kind of perception, what we have of ourselves and the world, may be a kind of reduction valve, produced by a kind of reduction valve, and if you take a psychedelic, that may open to a broader spectrum of impressions and sensory experiences. And what also can be hypothesized from the neurobiological research in that area is that these kind of therapeutic work may open these fixated and tightened up thought and patterns of thought and feelings in the brain. And so this may be the cause why these effects may be so sustainable, and also why they are so deep-reaching that even the trait anxiety is going down, right? It is also known that if you are in a kind of traumatic situation, the equilibrium between two two brain structures, the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala, are going into a kind of disequilibrium. So the amygdala, so the fear, is dominating, right? And the prefrontal cortex can't handle it appropriately anymore. And the other thing is that there must be something going on the in the limbic system too. And it is known from imaging studies that the limbic system and the paralimbic structures are activating during the psychedelic experience. And what are the potential risks? The risks are that the therapists may be not able to handle the anxiety, so you have to have good therapists there, because if they panic too, not a very good thing. So, and this refers to the integrity of the therapist. So was he having himself some problems or some difficult experiences in his life, so he knows how to cope with, or was he a typical medical student, like school, military, medical school, you know? And what also could happen is that the experience will not be completed during the session. A second session could help in that case, but that would be kind of unlucky. But with these 12 patients, we didn't find that. So it doesn't seem to be a real danger, but a potential danger. And also insufficient integration may be a problem. So if you don't have the appropriate session afterwards, it could be also a problem. So don't do that kind of work by yourself. And also what could result is a kind of social turbulence, which means that if you are having a completely different layout of yourself and your anxiety and how to cope with, your relatives may be irritated, right? This is meant by that. Thanks for your attention.